35 years ago, Mycron Steel was established with the goal of becoming a leading player in Malaysia's steel industry. And of course, from its roots in serving the domestic market, the company has since expanded its operations, diversifying into manufacturing and also international exports as well. And today, Mycron Steel is recognized for its expertise in producing flat steel products and also has solidified its position as a key contributor to the nation's industrial growth. Despite challenges such as the competition from low-cost imports and also fluctuating global steel prices. I am honored this morning. I am joined by the Executive Chairman, Mycron Steel, Tunku Datuk Yaakob Khaira. Tunku, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, talking about Mycron Steel, which has grown significantly since its incorporation in 2003. What were the strategic decisions that helped it evolve into a leading name in Malaysia's steel sector?
Well, actually, Mycron history actually starts much earlier. Mycron was listed in 2004, but the group was actually formed 55 years ago in 1969. At that time, it was purely a steel tube and pipe maker, right? And in Malaysia, there are about 30 pipe makers, steel tube makers, and they make steel tubes from what we call hot roll coil, which is flat steel. But 20 years later, in 1989, the group formed a subsidiary called Mycron Steel to basically manufacture cold roll coil. Now, cold roll coil is actually very, very thin sheets of metal, or paper thin, right? And what they do is they import hot roll coil into Malaysia. Hot roll coil is thick sheets of metal, and they roll it in the room temperature to make it cold roll coil, which is paper thin. And it's used for many industries like making drums for oil and gas industry, roofing sheets, also used for electronic industries, and for pipe making, and many other industries. So it's a core backbone to many downstream industries in the country, including furniture industry. So the mission of the group was to become a leading flat steel manufacturer, okay? Either flat steel in terms of pipes or flat steel in terms of cold roll sheets. And our mission was to be, at that time, to be the leading company. And Mycron Steel, the cold roll operation, we were the first ever cold roll manufacturer in Malaysia. Today, there are only two companies, and Mycron is the only Bumi Putra control flat steel cold roll coil manufacturer. So our mission is to keep growing. Our capacity in the tube making industry is about 150,000 tons a year, and in the cold roll coil industry it's about 260,000 tons. So our mission is basically quality, high standards, and in fact sometimes we manage to export our products to overseas, including the United States, so our quality is very, very high.
Let's talk about this synergy between all the subsidiaries under the group. How do you manage and ensure the synergy across operations itself?
Well, actually, we're referring to the Mycron Steel Berhad group. Well, Mycron Steel Berhad, basically, as I said just now, has basically two core activities in the manufacturing area. One is in the steel pipe making, and one is in the manufacturing of cold roll sheets. We also have a third company called Silver Victory, which specializes in trading of steel products and focuses a lot of it on exports of steel. So the CEO of the whole group is Encik Roshan Abdullah. He's done an amazing job, and right now, to mention, he also happens to be the chairman of MISIF, the Malaysian Iron and Steel Federation of Malaysia, leading the call for a stronger steel industry in the country.
Of course, this year marks the 55th anniversary of Malaysia Steel Tube, and also the 35th anniversary of the Mycron Steel and SCRC. What do these milestones, signify for the group?
Well, what it signifies is that we are here long term. Okay. Some of our challenges that we face in the industry is a lot of imports, cheap imports in the country, and this is a challenge for us because we are Malaysian, we're Bumi control, we want to stay here as long as possible, building the steel industry in this country, make it stronger. But cheap imports does cause a problem for industry, and we will have to overcome these challenges as the years go by.
Okay, I'll get back into the chip imports, but reflecting for the past decades at least, what are some of the challenges and also triumphs that have shaped Mycron Steel into the company it is today?
One of the big challenges is actually banking. The banking industry generally doesn't understand that there are two types of steel industries. The long steel industry, which is making rebars for construction, and the flat steel industry, which makes pipes and cold roll sheets for the manufacturing industry.
Right.
Okay, the furniture industry cannot exist without a cold roll coil maker. The steel drum industry cannot exist without CRC. The sheet metal roofing cannot exist without flat steel. In fact, almost anything you see in your house, which is made of metal and flat, is cold roll coil. From your air ducts, your window frames, even chips in your telephone is made of flat steel. So I think the issue has always been that the issue with our raw material, which is HRC or hot rolled coil, it fluctuates up, down over the decades. And when it goes up, when the price of steel goes very, very high, your banking facilities only allow you to therefore only keep a little amount of inventory. So you can't really operate properly. But when it does come down, you have plenty of facilities. So the issue was in the past has always been that the banking industry is fearful of the steel industry, principally because a lot of long steel product companies got into trouble. But they could not differentiate between long products and flat products. So banking was a big issue in the past. It's not an issue anymore, I think, because the banking industry has finally realized there is a big difference between long products and flat products.
Now, in terms of the triumphs and the best achievement of the company,
well,
past decades.
Well, I think we've had many challenges. We've managed to work very closely with our raw material supplier, which is JFE from Japan, and of course with the Soga Sosha, which is the trading house. We managed to bring in, we're the only company in Malaysia that has brought in what we call auto-grade cold roll coil. Auto-grade cold roll coil is cold roll coil made for the automotive industry. They require very specialized, high tensile steel, and we're the only company in Malaysia that can do that for the auto industry. Unfortunately, however, on the other side, the use of Malaysian-made auto-grade cold roll coil is still very small, because the automakers in this country have parents overseas and they'd rather use steel from their country of origin. So yes, we've managed to do that. We've also signed up also with our raw material supplier to also be the first green steel manufacturer. In other words, low carbon cold roll coil. So we'll be the first in the country. And we hope to ride on the ESG bandwagon in the country. So we've been, in a sense, foremost in developing new technologies, introducing new technologies into Malaysia, and we hope to do even more.
Okay. Interesting that you mentioned about the ESG and also the green steel. I'm going to touch a little bit on that later, but I want to talk about supporting Malaysian employment and also economic growth as well. For the company, you over 400 Malaysians employed by your company across the operations, of course. But how does Mycron Steel contribute to the growth of the local economy? You mentioned some of it just now, the trickle-down effect and of the industries, right? And the need of having a steel proper and strong steel industries itself. But if you can elaborate on that.
Yes. Well, how we can contribute? Well, how we actually do contribute to the Malaysian economy is that the products we make, cold roll coil, it's permeates through almost the entire manufacturing sector in Malaysia. And by having a stable supplier, which is Mycron, to local industry, gives those local industries, in a sense, steel security. Okay? They know that their steel, the raw material they need to manufacture their products, is made in Malaysia, is of high standard, and is reliable. It's always there. And that's very, very important if you're going to grow an industry. And grow whichever sector you're in, steel drum sector, furniture sector, automotive sector, you need to have a stable supplier. And that's why the concept of steel security is very, very important to many, many countries. In many countries, steel security is a strategic policy for many, many countries. Give you an example, recently United States, Nippon Steel was going to buy US steel, but the President and Congress rejected that deal because they said steel is a critical industry and must be owned by Americans. Yeah. So I hope similarly the role that Mycron plays in this industry and the role of other steel manufacturers in this country can be recognized by the government as this is a critical industry. Yeah. You must protect this industry.
I'll talk about because it's quite an important industry, as you mentioned, and of course you need a lot of skilled workers, right, and workforce in that sense. How do you ensure, how can you retain all this skilled workforce in light of very competitive global market?
Yes, all our employees are Malaysians, 400 over. They're highly skilled because our equipment is actually fairly high-tech equipment. If you ever walk into a Mycron factory or steel tube factory, you will realize that there's a lot of automation, a lot of mechanical moving parts, and your staff need to be very, very well trained, in particular in the health and safety area. And I'm glad to say our incidence record of injuries is extremely low.
Yeah, I did some reading. This is very interesting. This is the first time for me to get to know about this as well, because Mycron Steel products, have supported iconic national projects such as the Petronas Twin Tower, and the recent one is the Merdeka 118. Yeah. Maybe you can, share with us the role of innovation, and also in terms of role of innovation in terms of maintaining your legacy of quality.
Yeah. Yes, you mentioned yes, our Malaysia steel tubes. They're in KLCC. They're in Petronas Tower. They're in Merdeka 188. They're into many iconic structures in this country has Malaysia steel tube in it, right? And we actually set the highest standards for steel tube in this country. In fact, our steel tube is more expensive than all our competitors, right? And the reason for that is the industry views Malaysia steel tube as the highest standard. So whatever price we've set, they will always set it lower. And I don't believe in the price war, because I said lower, they'll set it lower, right? So it's with the highest standards. We tend to maintain that high standard. Now, the steel tube division of Mycron was started, as you said, 55 years ago. Yeah. But that started with a joint venture between a Malaysian company and a Japanese company. Yeah. So the standards that are followed in Malaysia steel tube is very, very high standards, or basically Japanese standards. You can imagine a Japanese factory is very clean, painted lines on the floor, high employee protection policies. So for our case, we followed a very, very high standard.
You mentioned about your collaboration, and also that you work closely with Japanese producers and other regions as well, I believe. But how do you leverage on your reputation that you have currently over the past many decades, right, to expand Mycron Steel's global footprint further?
So far, over these many decades, we've always operated within Malaysia. Okay, we had an inability to export simply because operating costs in Malaysia is much higher than for other countries. So, so for the last 50 over years, we've never exported anything. Our employee cost is high, our electricity cost is high, our gas tariff is high. But of recent note, we've been quite successful in the ability to export recently to the United States, Canada, Mexico. And the reason for that is because the world has become very protectionist. And these countries have imposed very, very high duties on countries like China, who are the low-cost manufacturer. And because of that, there's became opportunity for us to export our material, even though we consider ourselves to be a bit expensive. But with the duties, we became competitive in those markets. So I see the future opportunities are hopefully more exports. In the past, we've been operating at roughly about 50% capacity, which is not a healthy scenario to be in. But as we slowly export more and more, we increase our capacity utilization more, and therefore our average cost will drop.
Right. You mentioned earlier just now about the situation of low-cost imports, which has impacted Mycron Steel's operations and the steel industry as a whole. Can you, share further on that situation and how basically the importance of having government intervention on this issue? Yeah.
Okay, the story of the steel industry, in particular the flat steel industry, goes beyond Malaysia. The issues actually revolve around basically one country, it's China.
Yeah.
China has a huge amount of capacity to produce steel.
Yeah.
Their economy is going through difficult times now because of the many sanctions imposed on Chinese exports. At the same time, their property sector has taken a significant beating, and therefore the consumption of steel has dropped significantly. And because of that, the Chinese government has basically encouraged its steel manufacturers to export steel.
So dumping it out.
Send it out of the country and effectively dumping. Now, their competitive advantage of Chinese steel is basically this. Their energy cost is not so expensive, reasonable. Employee costs, cheaper. But the big advantage is they are subsidized by the government. They get given an duty exemption. So if you export steel, they get a tax cut, a tax rebate, which is actually against WTO rules, okay, which is why the United States and Europe impose a 25% duty on their steel. I hear that it might be increasing to 100% soon.
Yeah, but in January as well.
Yes, so when that steel couldn't go to Europe and couldn't go to the United States, it started coming to Malaysia. Yeah. And it started coming very, very cheap, all right? And Malaysia did act. Malaysia did impose an anti-dumping duty on China, roughly about 40% duty on Chinese material. But that material still comes into Malaysia in two ways. One is through literally smuggling, which we call besi terbang, okay? And the other is in the way of misdeclaration of what the steel is. Because the cold roll sheets, when it enters this country, if it's a regular cold roll, there is 25% duty. Yeah. But if it is declared as an alloy cold roll, then there is no duty. Now, what's the difference between regular cold roll and alloy cold roll? Is alloy basically the other material in the steel that makes it an alloy. And the reason why there's no duty on alloy cold roll is because these materials are not made in Malaysia. Okay, so therefore you don't impose a duty on something that's already that's not available in the country. So when this cold roll enters this country through misdeclaration or intentional misdeclaration, they will call a regular cold roll coil an alloy cold roll coil and avoid paying the duties, not just the regular duties, but also the anti-dumping duties. Yeah. So this leakage of either of misdeclaration of material coming to the country, it's not just cold roll coil, it's also galvanized steel sheets, it's also painted steel sheets. Across the whole range, there is substantial duty loss to the country. In fact, if you look at the data that comes out of the Chinese government of the amount of steel coming into, which they export to Malaysia, and you look at the Department of Statistics in Malaysia and the amount of steel coming in, there is a mismatch. Now, the total amount of steel cold roll sheet coming into the country is the same, but the alloy and the regular number is different. Yeah. Right? So it is coming in, but it's being declared as alloy steel. Yeah. And we estimate that the loss to Malaysian government in 2023 was about 38 billion ringgit. Wow. So this area needs to be plugged. I believe the government should enforce the rules they have. The rules are already there. It's a matter of enforcement. And instead of taxing the rakyat with more sales tax, plug the loopholes.
But what do you think? I mean, obviously we have the regulatory in places now. It's just about the execution of it. But how can we learn from other countries such as Indonesia in terms of protecting their steel industry?
Yes, Indonesia reacted very fast when China started dumping to Malaysia, actually several years ago, Indonesia reacted proactively very fast. They imposed a quota system that restricted the amount of steel that can come from different countries. Now, most people say, that's against WTO rules. But they did it anyway. America, when Donald Trump took over as president some time ago, he instantly imposed a 25% duty on Chinese goods. That's also against WTO rules because there was no proof of damage to industry, but he made the action.
Did it anyway,
and did it. And then Europe did it as well. So actually, no one's following the old WTO rules. Yeah. You can see even now, United States has become very protectionist. It's putting duties against even European products, and Europe's doing a similar thing. So I think the problem with our people in our government is we're very compliant people. We like to follow rules. So WTO rules say you cannot impose quotas, so we don't. WTO rules says you cannot do this, you cannot do that, and we follow. But no one else is following. So I think it's time for our government to be more proactive. Forget WTO rules because no one else is following. So why are we the only ones following? Right? And be more proactive. You don't need proof sometimes to take action. What they did in America was when they heard that the steel industry was being hurt, they imposed duties on imports and they said, I don't have a proof, but I'm imposing duty on you anyway. Then you come and prove to me that you are not dumping, then I'll give you back the duty. Right? So they're proactive. Tax first, prove you're innocent, I'll give it back to you. Yeah. Rather than wait 2-3 years to gather proof and then take action, which 2 years have gone by. Yeah. What came by exempted already. Yeah. You know, so it needs to be more proactive.
Yeah. Let's talk about the sustainability because you mentioned a little bit earlier just now. Of course, Mycron Steel itself aiming to lead the low carbon emission steel products. What challenges do you foresee in this transition of changing to that?
Yes. As the industry, not just in Malaysia, and the whole world moves towards producing low carbon steel or green steel, there are many challenges. The main challenge being, as we go towards that path, a lot of governments, some governments have started introducing carbon tax. Okay, but the move to go green is a long and difficult path. Yeah. All right. It means that your raw material needs to be green. So you either buy hot rolled coil made from green steel, which is what we're doing with JFE, but there's only a limited amount of green steel. Yeah. So if you impose too much carbon tax, when there's not enough raw material, then you're just basically adding more costs to the manufacturing process. Yeah. We've already got these issues now of minimum wage going to 1,700 ringgit. You already have electricity tariffs keep going up. Natural gas cost keeps going up. Cost in Malaysia keeps going up. And if you impose a carbon tax on top of that, Malaysia becomes less and less and less competitive. And therefore, at the same time, it's difficult because you impose more and more tax on Malaysian manufacturers, but you still let in these cheap imports. You can't have both. You can't say Malaysian companies are going to tax you, carbon tax and everything, but still allow cheap imports. If you want us to follow the higher standards that Malaysia sets, which industry is very, very happy to do, you need to protect this and stop cheap imports coming in. Because you can't keep pushing our costs up and bring in cheap stuff. You have to do both. If you do both, then Malaysia can go green relatively fast.
The lack of clarity in terms of regulations, also industrial support by the government, for instance, as you mentioned just now. But what's your hope for the government? Because it seems that the problem is there. We understand the problem, especially from the industry players, such as from you as well. But it seems that the execution and to do it and to face the real challenge is not there from the regulatory perspective.
It's also hard for the government to understand because the whole green and ESG scenario is an evolving scenario. Right. Okay? It's always changing. It's hard for a government to set up policy, but to set up the actionable measures and things to do. It's not easy. It'll take time. Even it's not just Malaysia. It's Europe as well. The United States as well. The move towards green does take time. It needs regulation, it needs clarity. It also needs a lot of communication between the rule makers and industry. An industry where regulators, governments make policy without consulting with industry is going to lead to disaster.
Yes.
And when I say communication and dialogue, it's not the style in Malaysia. You know, in Malaysia, the style is the regulator sit at the head of the table, he talks, asks a few questions, and if it's a difficult question, they'll avoid the issue, right? And so that it needs more dialogue, not monologue.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the problem. So it has to be a genuine, from the heart of the regulators. I'm here to really want to help this industry. Let's listen to the issues. Let's debate how we can move forward. Of course, the industry wants a successful industry, but it needs to have a regulator who is caring and understanding.
We mentioned a lot about the final questions. We mentioned a lot about the past achievement and also the challenges faced by the industry itself. Your hope for the industry moving forward?
I hope for industry is that no industry can survive without government. Government plays a very, very important role to any industry, whether it's furniture industry, electronic industry, tourism, or steel. Government that understands its industry and cares for its industry will help the industry grow. And that's what we're looking for. More dialogue with the government's assistance, in particular protection, and recognizing that steel is a strategic industry, a critical industry, and the issue of steel security should be used as a policy going forward to ensure there's more protection for industry. That way, there's more protection for industry, we can have more investment in industry. Over the last 4 years, you've seen 4 companies close down in Malaysia, right? Mycron Steel and 3 more others, they've shut down because it became not competitive to survive. So we need the government to protect Malaysian companies, make sure Malaysian companies succeed, and don't let foreign imports damage our industry.
All right. Thank you so much for joining Niaga AWANI this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.